Gunfire on the Florida State University campus today. Students and staff members running for safety and going into lockdown as law enforcement respond. And this afternoon, authorities have revealed that the suspected shooter in this case is related to a local sheriff's deputy. Welcome, everyone, to the 4 this afternoon. I'm Alex Savage.
And I'm Heather Holmes. So here's what we know about today's deadly shooting, the very latest from officials there. The gunfire was first reported around lunchtime, just outside the student union there at FSU in Tallahassee. 2 people were killed. We're told they were not students. At least 6 others were injured. The suspect has been identified as Phoenix Ickner, the 20-year-old son of a sheriff's deputy and a member of the Sheriff's Office Citizen Advisory or Youth Advisory Council. As Fox's Connor Hansen tells us, police say Ickner used his mom's former service weapon in today's shooting.
Several people were killed and others were hospitalized after a shooting on the campus of Florida State University. Police have taken at least 1 suspect into custody.
2 have died. 5 other innocents are being treated for their injuries.
The shooter is 20-year-old Phoenix Ickner, and he's the son of a Leon County Sheriff deputy. Unfortunately, her son had access to one of her weapons, and that was one of the weapons that was found at the scene.
Shots were heard near the student union, sending people on campus running for safety.
The shots rang out, and we were like, is that construction going on, or what was happening? And so we got up, looked out the window, and I remember looking outside and hearing 5 more shots go off. And I was like, what's going on? So I saw kids running away from the student union, and I walked away from the window. Then I walked back to the window and heard 6, 7 more shots ring out.
The university put out an alert telling students and staff to shelter in place and urging those not on campus to stay away.
All of a sudden, we see everyone from the bars start running. And then in that moment, we're just like confused. We're unsure of what's going on. And so we just decided it was best to go seek shelter.
Classes were canceled while police surrounded the campus.
Law enforcement, our FSU police officers, absolute heroes. They responded to the scene and immediately neutralized the suspect and prevented this from being a bigger tragedy.
Both the FBI and ATF are assisting local police with the investigation. In New York, Connor Hansen, Fox News.
Joining us now live here in studio is Mark Naveau, former FEMA coordinator and Fremont Battalion Chief. Mark, always appreciate your time. You obviously have a lot of experience responding to crisis situations. Describe the challenges with today's shooting, given that it happened on a sprawling college campus.
Yeah, thankfully I don't have a tremendous amount of experience in this area,
right,
but enough. You know, when you think about this, there's so many people. There's 42,000 students on that campus, and so you've got a number of people running around. They're excited. The police officers are trying to respond, and you're trying to determine who the perpetrator is in this case. If you remember in 2018, during the Parkland shooting, the perpetrator actually left and escaped with the rest of the kids and was sitting at a McDonald's having lunch with one of his victims' brothers or sister. Mm-hmm. He was able to kind of meld into the group. So it's the challenge of making sure everybody's safe and that the place is locked down and there's no further damage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously we heard from law enforcement today. They described really a rapid response to this scene here after getting those reports of gunfire. Yeah. How has the training for law enforcement in terms of how they respond to these situations changed over the years, and how much of a difference do you think that may have made in a situation like what we saw today, and maybe limiting the number of people who were injured here?
Yeah, huge. Unfortunately, what we've learned over the years is you cannot be passive. You have to go in there, you have to be aggressive, and you may not have all the resources you need, you may not have the backup you need, but you've got to get in there. We know that most people in mass shootings are killed within probably the first 2 or 3 minutes, unfortunately, and most times before police officers arrive. So this is one of those scenarios that you don't have time to sit back back and think. You've got to get there as quickly as possible and react. The officers are in tremendous danger.
Yeah, the police chief today really applauding the coordinated effort, Mark, and there seems to be more of a focus on making sure that everyone works together when responding to something like this.
Yeah, and I think that's an outgrowth of what we saw at the school shooting, you know, and unfortunately, we're getting better at this. You don't ever want to get better at something like this, but it looks like with the coordination, and they were able to minimize the damage and get people to the hospital pretty quickly, too.
Now, obviously, you know, comes the really complicated work of trying to piece all of this together here. You have a massive crime scene in the middle of the campus, hundreds of witnesses here, and then you have really this sort of potentially a complicating factor here, the fact that the suspected shooter is the son of a local sheriff's deputy here who apparently had access to one of his mother's guns. What do you think, what if any bearing does that have on how this investigation plays out?
Yeah, I hope that the victims don't get lost in all this, too. You know, the people who were killed and those who were injured, because sometimes we start focusing on the investigation, have a discussion about that, and we tend to forget about that. We don't want to do that. Now, it's going to be complicated because a police officer is a member of the community, right? They know people there. That's part of their job, is to get to know the community. So now to have one of your relatives involved, have the investigative agency that you may or may not be working for start the investigation, along with all the other tangents, you can just imagine how difficult this is going to be, because they have to be very, very careful and precise. The shooter, you know, he wasn't neutralized per se, and so is this the larger plot? Was this an isolated incident? We want to find out.
We also understand that the sheriff's deputy was a former school resource officer, which is a little bit ironic given that her role at one point in her career was protecting campuses from activities like this and from tragedy like this. I want to talk, though, lastly, Mark, about this message that went out to students rather quickly, warning them to shelter in place. Don't go near you know, any windows. Keep them shut. Don't go near any doors. How important is that to get that message out really quickly?
And with cell phones, they can do that instantaneously, where we couldn't do that before. And with group texting, it can get out, as you said, in a moment's notice. The good part of that is they can lock down the facilities and make sure everybody stays shelter in place. Don't run outside the building, because that complicates things. The police officers are trying to figure out who's who in all this mass. If they can keep that number down to a minimum and who they're trying to keep an eye on, it certainly makes it safer for people, and it's also more effective for the investigation part of it.
Yeah, we've really seen things change in terms of the response to emergencies like this. All right, we appreciate the insight. As always, good to see you. Mark DeBoe, thank you for being here. We turn now to Santa Rosa.